Hey, family, this is me, Bishop John Seldis here, and I am pleased and proud to be coming to you again on these airways. Man, modern technology is such a thing, man. We can be sitting wherever we are, and with just a couple of devices and some internets, as the people where I come from, they put S's on everything. So it's the interwebs and the internets and all that kind of stuff on them kind of bases, right? That just in just a few clicks, we can be broadcasting to the whole wide world. We're coming to you, and I'm glad to be broadcasting and coming to you with on this platform. We call Relevant Conversations with me, your host, Bishop John Seldis. And tonight, we have not failed to deliver another interesting conversation with one of my friends. And listen here. Now, there's some people that are smart. There's some people that are knowledgeable. There's some people that are charismatic. And then there's some people that really do have it. This person I'm getting ready to bring to our platform tonight has it. Let me tell you a couple of personal stories. When our son Pamela and our son went off to college, we had one of those orientation days, and so in a particular school he went to, we had to sit in a class. We had to kind of go through a morning of his schedule. And we sat in the class. I had to get in them little tight seats, of the poundage today. Them tight seats in some of these classrooms don't fit for those of us who have who are girthy. Let me say it that way, girthy. And this man came out and began to do a part of a lecture from a class he teaches to the first year students. And it was this man we're going to bring to our platform. He was known to me from a distance, but in getting to know him over these years, have found him to be just a giving and generous personality who is very informative, whose conversations and his perspectives are profoundly deep and accurate. More importantly, he gives his time to serving our community in all kinds of ways. He certainly is a professor and a scholar, a thinker, has done all of it, has got all of the credentials that come with all of that. But he's also an on-air personality. He's often a featured pundit or commentator. Let me say it that way. On Connecticut NPR and across the region and the country for that matter. Let me bring to our platform and say thank you for being here, Dr. Bilal Sekou. Come on and greet the peoples.
Man, I hope my mama was listening to that introduction. I was like, I want to meet him.
Right. I know what it feels like when people be introducing you, be like, what are they talking about? What? But I meant every word of it, brother. Every time I hear you out there on the airways, or if I see you in an interview, I'm confident that whatever you got to say, whatever you're being asked, you'll give good profound thinking around it, good solid connections. You can't say that about everybody. Mm-hmm.
Right.
And you can't say that about everybody. But I in fact, when I know you're on, I'm listening in particular for your insights and your observations. And I'm pleased that you're here with us tonight. Let's jump in. These are some interesting times we're living in. There are. It does not escape me that as we are, there's some major strivings that are politically motivated. Let's be clear. The conflicts and the warrings and the strivings that are going on, not just in what they call the so-called Middle East. I would argue that's probably Northern Africa historically more than what we've now named as the Middle East. But I ain't gonna argue with people about that. But that not only that conflict, and we'll get to that in a minute. There are other places in the on the globe that are in conflict that you don't hear anything about at all. So let me see how I'm good. We've heard about Afghanistan because that's the war we've been in since for the last 20 some odd years.
Mm-hmm.
But did do folk know that Algeria has been in conflict or Benin?
Mm-hmm.
Burkina Faso,
Right.
Cameroon.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, let me say this too. These are places in Africa.
Mm-hmm.
The Central African Republic, Chad. Chad has been in civil war. Now, several of these places in Africa, Boko Haram, which is a kind of some would call it an extremist Islamic group, has been at the center of the strivings and the warrings that are going on. But the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Ethiopia, been turned up for years. And now they've kind of settled it down, but they tell me in the north and the northeastern region of Ethiopia, they're still in major conflict and strivings. Ghana has been in some turmoil. Am I making some sense here, y'all? Iraq has not been settled yet. We dipped into that for a minute here in the United States, trying to build democracy all over the world and trying to nation build, some would say. Cote d'Ivoire, another place where Boko Haram has been messing around, and the extremist Islamic, in fact, Al Qaeda, it may be involved in some of these strivings. But can I bring it over here to the other side of the Western Hemisphere? Did y'all know Colombia been turned up? The political unrest that's in Venezuela, for example. Brazil ain't far from something or another, because it's a lot of struggle where the extreme right wing factions are turned up, and there's political unrest in lots of different places. It's not just here in the United States, for example, that there are groups that are taken to the streets in protest. I lift up some of these countries and some of these spaces and places to say it's not just Palestine and Israel that are in war or in political conflict or strivings. I call it strivings because there may not be in some of these places a declared war, but they're de facto at war. So can you give some comment? I'd opened up and said, here, go paint your picture.
And that's a really big landscape, that very big canvas, I guess, to continue the metaphor that you laid out there. I mean, and listening to you really describe, a sort of globe, spanning, sort of analysis or discussion of many issues around the world in which, conflict, conflicts that are not new, conflicts that have been going on in some cases for decades. I mean, in listening to what you describe, I mean, a lot of it obviously is concentrated in the global South. I think some of it is a reflection of the reality of, even at a global level, certain lives matter more than other lives matter, right? And so, the attention span of, the American media, the attention span of policymakers, and for that matter, our own personal attention span. I mean, a lot of people, even within our community, couldn't tell you where many of those places you just sort of laid out are really at. You gave breadcrumbs by telling us that they're in Africa, but so for we have a news media that doesn't pay a lot of attention to international issues. We have a news media that focuses on certain groups, certain individuals from certain parts of the world who matter more, who receive more attention, from the news, who receive more attention from us. And so, part of what has to occur is that we need to turn that around. And so, obviously, having a space like this and sharing what you're sharing and really, lifting up, these issues and putting them on our consciousness, puts us in a place where we can perhaps do something about it, right? To lend some support to people, whether they're in, struggles for liberation or they're in struggles for, various forms of economic opportunity and economic freedom. I mean, I would add on to that list that you just laid out there, this sort of global movement of migrants, all around the world, going, and we often focus a lot, obviously, on Central South America and south of the US border, but this is a global phenomenon in which millions of people are on the move. They are on the move because of the harmful effects of neoliberalism. They are on the move because of the destruction of our environment. They're on the move because of rising global food prices, the inability to find work, the inability to sort of do the kind of things that would make it possible for them to live in the communities that, in the nations that they were born in and live in. And so, that's another human crisis that's a part of our, sort of era right now that we are living through and we're all experiencing. But as you clearly have laid out, it's not on everyone's attention span right now, that we're not paying attention to a lot of these issues that really matter, and the interconnectedness of all of this. When we look at, the struggle that's going on in Palestine right now and we look at, what, many people, clear-eyed people, can identify as an apartheid-like, system with Gaza, and and the sort of reality that it's not a military solution, but it has to be a political solution that will bring peace to that region, if it's possible to bring peace to that region. But certainly what we're seeing is not a path, but we also need to make those connections to other sort of issues that are going on around the globe with people who are living under, oppression, and there are some common denominators in all of that. And unfortunately, our country tends to be one of those common denominators, whether it's military aid or cover for oppressive sort of policies and programs. And so all of those are the kind of things, when you lay out that map that you laid out of problems and challenges around the world, but also the next step is how we make those connections between these struggles, because ultimately we need to bring people together who are fighting these struggles around the world and make this an international sort of struggle against many of the things that are creating these problems, many of the systems that are creating these problems.
Yeah. It's fascinating to me that many of these struggles are not new struggles. Many of these wars are not new wars. They're strivings and situations. Can I call them situations? Yeah, that predate even our modern understanding of the times we're in. I left off Russia and Ukraine. That seems to dominate a lot of our airways right now, as opposed to not so much Yemen. Yemen has been under a struggle for a long time, or Sudan and South Sudan. These are spaces and places where there are wars and rumors of wars, and where there are humanitarian atrocities that are occurring. And it was interesting to me. You named that people are on the move, so there's a lot of immigrating. A lot of people's moving in the Palestine Israeli issue right now. The border of Egypt being open on the southwestern end of the state of Israel, and how the concern for many Palestinians who had occupied the Gaza Strip is what happened in 1948, where they were displaced from their lands in what we call now the West Bank in Palestine. They have taken up residence in a permanent way in other spaces and places. So you have Palestinians that are in Lebanon. You have Palestinians that have occupied, that have been in Syria for
Right.
for generations. You have Palestinians that are in Jordan, or Saudi Arabia, who have never been ever able to come back home. For example, that's what
Yeah.
the term Nekba comes
Mhm.
in. And when I talk about it in terms of Palestine, when 750 to 800,000 people in one night lost not only their land but their citizenship, and what that means, I think what's coming to bear is the whole idea. If you would allow me to play like I'm a political scientist for a few minutes, the whole idea of the nation state,
Right.
which is pretty modern for human, over human time, is coming into question, and what's underneath it are not just political ends, but also natural resources.
Mhm.
In Palestine, I remind people who've never been there, or I say to them, that region of the world in particular, that size, it's about the size of New Jersey here in the United States.
Right.
It is a desert. And so they need water. Isn't it interesting that the conversation about water is one in the context of that particular conflict, particularly, and having been there, how precious water is in a region of the world like that. Could you talk a little bit about one more thing? I find it really funny. We talk about the United States' border. The border, you mean the border between Mexico and the United States, where what we call the United States used to be Mexico? Oh, okay. All right. And
About
the
a third
question,
about a third of Mexico was taken by the United States. Yeah, absolutely.
that's right. So when people are when they start talking about white settler colonialism, and the project of the United States possibly being a white settler colonialist project, there might be some truths in that, but not just only here in the United States, where these natural boundaries that were quite porous in other times have some real restriction that are man-made, quite frankly. So could you comment a little bit about that as you think about these current events?
Right. And again, you're laying on a lot there, man. But, I mean, just, for a moment, just to sort of go back to, Palestine, certainly the fear of a lot of Palestinians is that, with all of the bombing that's going on and, quote unquote, the northern part of the country, if people do exit, they do worry about their ability to get back into Gaza. And there are certainly religious extremists who are in Israel who would like to see them leave and then not allow them to come back. And so, this displacement of the Palestinian people only sort of deepens and grows worse. If that, becomes the ultimate outcome, that people do leave, and to some extent, this, the level of violence, the escalation of it, the unwillingness to to have a ceasefire and to try to figure out, some resolution, certainly suggests that, there is collective punishment that's going on. And there is an effort to create and to deepen the crisis that's already been there for, Palestinians who have been living in Gaza in particular. And I say all of that to say that, I think, at this point, certainly, people who are Jewish Israelis have a right to live in peace. They have a right to live, safe and secure, but occupation will not create that sort of safety. And it really, and it's a long history. It's a complex history of, in terms of trying to understand, the Israel and the Palestinian, sort of struggle. And I know when this conflict happened, I immediately said to myself, I just started collecting books and articles. I said, I've got to deepen my understanding, because I think, globally we're at an inflection point. I think we are dealing with a number of issues that is really shaping, I think, the future of our planet, going, into the near future. The issue of climate, the kinds of conflicts that you've talked about, the sort of way in which neoliberal policies have really sort of, devastated, and it's devastating our environment. The massive movement of people around the globe is really a function of, both the financialization of, sort of global capitalism, the sort of ability of, capital to move anywhere it wants to, the pressure it puts on countries that don't sort of give it its way, in terms of labor, in terms of environmental issues, and the kind of destruction. I mean, the species is at stake. It isn't just one of those situations where the harm can be sort of limited, but I think we are really faced with the need to make some decisions, that, is really about the survival of the species, the survival of the planet, and those of us who live on it. And so all of these things, and I think, the question you're raising about borders, about the ability, I mean, of people to move. I mean, when you create havoc and you create an environmental crisis, and you have sort of created these problems that are now forcing people out of their countries, and then you're closing the borders to them and not allowing them to have that ability to go places to find work and to find safety and security. It really demands that we need to really sort of rethink how we are doing this as human beings, on this planet. And the crisis just continues to deepen unless we take action. And those of us of conscience, those of us who are out here working, whether at the local level or connected at the international level, it really, demands that we step up our involvement, we step up our, activism, we continue to raise our voices with justice and equality, being some of the basic sort of ideas that drive what we are, trying to do.
I agree, brother. And I know I'm biting off a whole swath, and I'm doing it intentionally, in part to name, at least in this space, that what we're talking about is huge. And it's not, you can't just focus right here, because I would say to you, and many, that for example, let's take the Palestinian Israeli situation at face value. I've asked this question of a number of folk in the conversation. When was the last time when any country decides to do nation building that it actually works over time? All right. So you bomb us, I bomb you. You bomb us, I bomb you. We do that back and forth until a victor is declared. All right, and then infrastructure has to be rebuilt. Governance has to then occur, and when one people then move in to rule another people, when has that worked? I'll wait.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't work. We know it doesn't work. And what I know, and what many know, or at least suspect, when we do that, then we've just gifted the next 3 generations to carry on the very struggle we call ourselves ending. Right? All right. And that's what's happened in that conflict. And I would dare say in all of these conflicts, what we got going on in Russia and Ukraine is similarly set, where one group of people says, this is our land. Historically, this has always been our land. Well, historically, it's been our land. And well, we want to be this island, and everybody's got a claim on the land. I found it very interesting, for example, to think about the Ottoman Empire. And for nearly a millennia, right? That whole region was run by. So while I had a question, Pamela and I went to Bosnia, and I wonder, these people, this is largely a Muslim country. Why? Well, for 800 years, nearly 1,000 years, the Ottomans ruled there.
Mm-hmm.
And it was out of a regional conflict that the First World War got started 100 years ago, a little more than 100 years ago, when Archduke Ferdinand was assassinated. Well, most of us today don't even know what I'm even talking about right now. I know that. But what I wanna lift up is that the current strivings and fights have these long rooted conflicts in its past, where governance and the say of a people over land and space and how to get along amongst themselves have other interests that come in and wade in, and then they start beefing. It's as simple as, the Hatfields and the McCoys, to use that metaphor. And I wonder, I don't wonder, I kind of suspect, I don't wonder, but I somewhat suspect that where there is violence, hatred, and violence and injustice and oppression, we don't get to resolution. We may have Dr. King said it like this: we may not have fighting, but we ain't got peace.
Right.
Yeah. So I'm particularly interested as a political scientist when you think of this interplay of violence and oppression and conflict. How do we see our way to at least a different side that what has been playing out over and over and over again? And I know if you really had all the answer, you'd have wrote it in the book, and we'd be somewhere on some island sipping on hot toddies and do it. I know that already, but could you speak to it just a little bit? Bring in your scholarship and your knowledge and information.
Yeah. And you're absolutely right. If I had all the answers to this, man, I'd be rich right now. But I think, even in your analysis, there's even another layer to this, and it is a sort of a global military industrial complex. I mean, what amazes me is, we can't find money to allow students to get out of this mountain of debt, right, that they will be paying for decades. But, to hear, we're going to send 10 billion, 20 billion, 30 billion, 5 billion. And what this really is we're not sending money, we're sending weapons. We're paying, American and European military companies for weapons and weapon systems that we are sending out to places like Israel and places like Ukraine, and even these conflicts in Africa that we see. I mean, I'm always amazed that they've got these crisp looking uniforms on, these shiny brand new weapons. And that is a product of this global, death machine, that we call our military industrial complex, and the profiteering that goes on, with these conflicts that are going on around the world. And so there are a lot of people who are very quick to supply weapons and not to try to negotiate peace, not to try to intervene with dealing with some of the systemic problems that have really created the crisis. I mean, as you talked earlier about, we often look at history and we look at it this way, but we need to look at it from that long view. And so, to understand some of these modern conflicts, we also need to understand the history of colonialism. We have to understand the decolonization sort of struggles that took place, the intervention on the part of the US and other European powers in terms of creating the sort of seeding that conflict in many of these countries. And we're living with the modern sort of we're living with the modern sort of consequences of what needs to be understood of as decades and decades of problems that have been created. And so in that sense, I think looking at, what's going on around the world, we need to have that historical, point of view. I'm amazed, sometimes I hear people talk about, back when the Ottomans were in control, we were in conflict then, we're still fighting that battle, which is a whole nother amazing thing to me, that people are carrying 500-600-year-old grudges, in that particular sense. But I think, again, I come back to the need for us to really be very clear-eyed in our analysis and understanding of the basis of these conflicts, to understand the systemic and structural factors that are continuing to contribute, U.S. policy, and Russia and other European powers, the role that they are playing increasingly in these areas of conflict, especially in Africa, paying attention to what China is trying to do in terms of its economic sort of footprint on the continent. And that's just Africa, and that's not counting Central and South America, the interventions that have gone on over the years that continue to shape the present, right? You can't look at, coups we have sort of played a part in Chile, and efforts to undermine Venezuela, Cuba, and I've been to Cuba, and I saw the effects of the American embargo. And so again, I stress that we need to have a deeper understanding of the history of these conflicts and the history of the world we live in, especially if we're going to intervene, if there's going to be an intervention to do anything about these things, and to have a willingness to, to form solidarity with people around the world who are struggling against, neocolonialism, who are struggling against the harsh effects of global capitalism and neoliberalism, who are dealing with ethnic and religious persecution. I mean, again, we have sort of lost that internationalist perspective, that internationalist sort of focus, making those connections and that solidarity and paying attention, because there is a lot of, pressure to narrow our focus, to narrow our attention, to pay attention to only those things that the mainstream media is paying attention to. And right now, that's Ukraine, that's Israel and Palestine, but it's not Africa, it's not Central, it's not South America, it's not those other places around the world that we should also be paying attention to, because many of these things are very linked.
Yeah, and here's what's another interesting piece, and I'm getting ready to go long, and you help me keep it. So we're two Black men, and I find it very interesting that when we begin to talk, I'm having traveled some like you. What travel did for me, and I mean traveling outside the United States, one of the things that it made very clear to me, that I was not just a card carrying, passport holding United States citizen, but that in fact I was a citizen of the world, and that my peoples had something to do and came from other places. And so now, okay, I'm a preacher, y'all know that. And so I'm gonna turn to Howard Thurman for a minute, who for me said it's a strange freedom to be set adrift in the world without any kind of what he would call moorings or rootedness. That's a strange freedom to have some sense of a space and place, but also not know where that space or place is. And I'll name this in something that happened to me. I was in Korea, and I had the opportunity to be one of a few people early on, a number of years ago, to enter into what was formerly known as the DMV, the demilitarized zone between South Korea and North Korea. And we were on a train, and at a point, we were allowed to exit from the train and walk about in this fenced-in area. And I was there with my host, and this was cool. I was, walking around. And then I noticed a guy that went in front of us who was carrying a small, suitcase. And he went to what I perceived to have been the furthest northernmost point within this fenced-in area. In the suitcase, it was a trumpet case. And he opened up that case and began to blow his horn. And he started blowing his horn, and he was blowing it. It became very clear to me he was blowing songs that the Korean folk knew, because they started kind of singing. They were singing. They were getting it. They was getting it. Then he started playing songs I knew, like Amazing Grace, Old Lang Syne. And then it became as clear to me as you are sitting there looking at me on this broadcast tonight. I knew what was happening. I got emotional and began to tear up. And my host said, "You okay? You okay?" I said, "Yeah, I'm okay. I know what's happening now. I know what's happening now." And so when we were called back in, I kind of waited around to the end. When he gathered up, he put his trumpet back in the case and then came on. And I began to applaud him as he walked toward the train. We were getting ready to board to go back to where we had come from. And he walked directly up to me. He said, "Where you from?" I said, "The United States." And of course, he busted out. He looked at me like I had three heads. He knew I was already Black and American. They can smell Americans in other places in the world. He said, "No, where you from in America?" And I told him where I was from. And he said, "I have not been to North Korea in over 60 years. I left a mother. I left two brothers and several sisters and family in North Korea who I have not seen since I left during the Korean War in the 1950s. And he said, I was blowing my horn to let them know I was all right." And that there was something mystical and spiritual that would reach the miles. He was casting that net far and wide. And I knew that. I recognized that because I too had a similar feeling of being from a place, standing on the shores of North America here, looking eastward toward Africa, longing for a people I was connected to but didn't know, wanting them to know we survived, our lineage survived, that somehow we're connected in that kind of way. The reason I tell that story and I share that with you is because for me there is something profoundly both spiritual but very human, that these boundaries and borders and names and claims that we have don't really exist, because the cultures we share tell us that we're from some other places and we have some other spaces of identity that connect us, right? Having traveled, you see it. I hear it in the sound of the choirs that come out. I don't know what language they speak in here, but it sure sound like church where my grandmama number from, when they start singing what I would call a meter hymn. Love the Lord, he heard my cry. And that tone and those sounds sound very much in the south of the United States, sound very much like the tones and the sounds that I heard in Candomblé, in Capoeira, in Brazil, that I hear in West Africa, in some of those tribal traditions. It's the same sound. It's the same. We're the same peoples making the same, what I would call joyful noise. That what connects us, it goes deeper than the borders and the boundaries that what you name neoliberalism and capitalism and democratized capitalism has driven or tried to, or attempted to drive wedges between us. Say a little bit more about.
But what's amazing about the neoliberal project, though, is that they don't want those borders to prevent that sort of global movement of capital, but they want those borders to exist to prevent the global movement of that exploitable population of people in places where they can locate and then exploit to create cheap products and cheap goods. But they don't want that population of people to move, right? And the devastation it leaves in its wake, what in terms of what the global capitalism is doing in the neoliberal project. And so borders mean something quite different to them than perhaps nation states, because they see themselves as really being above nation states. And in fact, the rules that nation states are trying to create for them, they don't want to have those rules or conditions be placed on them, right? And so if they don't want to pay taxes here, they'll just go some places they don't have to pay taxes. If they don't want to deal with labor unions and workers' rights and certain kind of wages, they'll just go someplace else where they can find an exploitable workforce that they can pay lower wages, not worry about environmental concerns, and do a lot of those kinds of things, right? That they like to do. So, I mean, for me, breaking down, those borders is also just so important in terms of, helping me to realize that this struggle that sometimes I feel like I'm engaged in here in the United States, and I can feel isolated in what I'm doing, is that I need to also be able to make those connections, right? And to make those connections with, brothers and sisters who are struggling in other parts of the world. Again, it's not just Africa, but it's Central, it's South America, it's the Caribbean, it's Asia. Um, and feeling, at that spiritual level that you're describing, that these struggles are connected, and that there are some common enemies that we face, in the world. And, you know, to be able to defeat those common enemies, right, we need to be able to make those global connections. We need to be able to, find ways to link these struggles for, economic rights here in the US to those same struggles that people are engaged in Vietnam and Thailand and Africa and Asia and other parts of the world. And so, when we think only in terms of national borders and national identity, we lose the fact that we share this global humanity and that we are connected at a global level. Whereas, political leaders and corporations want us to be separated and to really think only about what's our own national interest here in the US, as opposed to what's in the interest of humanity. And so the global crisis, I think, puts this in front of us in a way. The globalization tells us that we can't survive this as Americans while the rest of the world goes to, to hell. These borders will not protect us from the consequences of our poor stewardship of our planet that we live on. And so that's, to me, is one of those examples of something that really suggests to us that thinking, about this from a very sort of narrow focus is not a way to deal with this crisis that we're facing.
I know. I'm gonna shift this one more time for the last little bit of our time together tonight, Brother Sekou. Let's talk about Connecticut just for a little bit, and I want to apply the same analysis and the same lenses we were just doing as we talked about the globe and its warrings and strivings. Here we are on the eve of municipal elections here in the state of Connecticut. Yeah, and what that means is, for those of you who are not here in Connecticut, we're voting for city councils and town councils and mayors and municipalities. Here in Connecticut, we have 169 different towns. And I mean, we got these towns they mean it with every fiber of their being. They're gonna be very distinctly different. Don't make the mistake of calling Hartford or West Hartford Hartford. Don't make that mistake. Do not. There is a city called Hartford, and there is another town called New Hartford. No semblance. Different city in a different part of the state. There is a New Haven, but there is a West Haven. Don't make a mistake and call one the other and the other the one, because you will get corrected. And so here we are in a state that has 169 towns. We got about, I would say, we got 5, 6, 7 urban centers of various sizes.
Nice. Yeah.
And you know, I've made this claim. These are facts. This ain't opinions. This is just facts. All of the major towns and cities in the state of Connecticut have Black and brown populations that are the largest number numerically. Yet, in this arrangement, this last 4 years, all of those towns have been governed by white male leadership. The chief executive officers, mayors, or selectmen have largely been white men. And so it's been a very interesting time. And every time I've said that, people get turned up, they get offended. It's just the truth. And I question, what does that mean if we're talking about our engagement in this time? So that's the context. In Bridgeport, we just had a ruling that happened last week where a judge agreed. Now you catch me if I got this twisted up and I ain't got this just right. A judge agreed that there was something fishy going on with the primary elections in Bridgeport. And so they got to do another primary. The judge has so ordered. Now, of course, I know one side sued so that could be looked at. The other side has countersued and wants to appeal the initial ruling. So I don't know how all that's going down the line and working out. But we got somebody referred to Connecticut as Corrupticut, and they may not be wrong with that. I mean, we've had lots of and
there's a long history.
Here we go again, right? That there's something going on here that's afoot that has some roots in a certain kind of way, and yet we are here to try to sort through the personalities, to sort through the political. Let me say it this way: the political entanglements. That exist there, and many folk feel fairly deflated and fairly disengaged, and not quite down with the cause. I mean, it's a very interesting phenomenon. What's your take on it? What's your take on this? I know you got lots to say, but
I mean, there are a lot of different angles to take on those issues. Of course, as you pointed out, I mean, Connecticut's large cities have large non-white populations in those cities, and yet the leadership of all of them, people of color, at different points in time have held some leadership in some of the cities. As the work that I do, I'm a big, supporter of political activism, political engagement. But for me, it doesn't stop at voting. Voting is one of the ways in which one can be politically active, but there are many other things that people need to be doing. It's difficult to inspire people to do those things when you have, leadership that fails, for example, to address some of the more critical issues and critical needs of your community. So it's very easy to slide into a sense of hopelessness, perhaps, or a sense of, of this sort of belief that they're all corrupt and what's the point? What's the point? Part of my response is that even if you don't show up to vote, they're still going to make decisions that will affect your life, right? And at the end of the day, again, voting is one of the things you do, but it isn't the only thing you do. We were talking earlier about how, running for political office is one of the, things that people can do, and certainly, people stepping into those roles, being willing to engage in leadership in the community, in the nonprofit sector, working on, running for public office, for example, working at the community level, raising issues and pressuring political leadership to do more. And so for me, rather than retreat from politics because of my frustration, with the failure to sort of bring about all of the kind of things that I think should be done, it actually inspires me more to get involved and to push harder. But I can't push alone. I need brothers like Bishop John Selders and Sister Pamela. I need people like that who are also alongside with me. And so I feel like I, can have more power and more impact if I'm not trying to do this thing on my own, that I am really, this has to be grassroots. We have to go out into these neighborhoods. We have to talk to people who have answers. I mean, one of the things I always say to my students, that we tend to look at, communities as places where people just have problems. People have answers. People have solutions. People have dreams. They have dreams for their children. They have aspirations for their communities and the people who live in their communities. They want to transform them, and we need to figure out ways to engage them and to put additional pressure on these political leaders. And I say all of that not because I think it'll be an easy thing to accomplish, but I say it because if we don't try, they're still going to make decisions that are going to affect us at the end of the day. So, I'm going to be frustrated one way or the other, but I'd love to be fighting. I can deal with my frustration a little bit differently if I'm actually in the arena and I am struggling to engage and to make changes. I can deal with the frustration a lot more differently than I can if I'm sitting at home, in my armchair and complaining and ranting at the world. And to me, that won't get things done. As you and I both know, there is a long history of, people who have been engaged. I am able to do the things that I do because I stand on the shoulders of people who didn't sit on the sidelines, people who took risks, people who did bold and courageous things, right? And I can't look at the opportunities that I've had, the education I've had, the voice that I have tried to use. I can't look at that and say, it would be a lot easier if I just retreated into my own little shell and made my money and lived in my house and not sort of engaged the world. I feel too much of a sense of obligation to be out there, working on social justice and racial justice and economic justice. And we just need to find a way to bring more people into this work. And we need to, to do that in a way to build the kind of people power that hopefully can be transformative, in our world. We've seen that happen in the past, and I think we can, and we have to do that kind of work going into the future.
I have this. I have a passion for history, and I think in a former life, if I gave myself over to thinking that we have different lives, and I might, before this one, I was probably a historian and a history teacher of some sort. And over the last number of time here, I found myself back 200 years ago, thinking about what Black folk here in New England, and in particular in Connecticut, what their lives were and what they were engaged with. And I've discovered people. There's a man who 200 years ago, in 1823, sued the Connecticut General Assembly for voting rights. Right? I was floored to hear recently, not long ago, to hear about this guy. And so I'm involved in a little research project. Not a little; it's going to be a big one. To find out what were Black folk doing back, in these times and days. That I got challenged a few weeks ago here. Around Andrew Judson, who was a judge, ultimately served on the United States Circuit Court here in the region. He was the judge that ruled in the Amistad case, that sent it, onto the United States Supreme Court, Well, come to find out, an attorney friend of mine challenged me to read the Dred Scott decision, and the majority opinion that was crafted by Chief Justice Roger Taney. And in that, and he challenged me. He said, "Have you ever read it?" And of course, I said, "Yeah, I've read it." And then I realized, well, maybe I've only read the pieces that worked for my lecture.
I teach it, man. I teach it.
Right, right, gotcha. And to find out that a little known court battle here in Connecticut helped to shape that landmark legislation of 1857, the Dred Scott decision that said that there is no law that for Black people, that white people are bound to respect. And that Andrew Judson was involved in making sure that all happened and finding out the players and all that kind of stuff. I'm saying that all to say we have a, I would say I have a moral obligation to sit in the fire a little bit and to begin to talk, teach, share, expose, be in conversation, both in small crowds, big crowds. Use this platform, use all the platforms and all the ways and places that I can talk and share. That we have a history here that is so great and profound, of people who have been active, who chose to do things to change the trajectory and the plight of our people, and of Black folk in particular, but I would say of people who were struggling at the margins, right? That they were not insignificant in their sacrifices,
right?
That their sacrifices had compounded meanings. And I am committed to sharing that, because it is, in my opinion, that when we do that kind of sharing, when we make that kind of, I want to say, active engagement, that we actually change the course of not only our today but our tomorrows. And it is, in fact, now I'm gonna talk religious once again. I'm sorry. It is the call of some of us to do just that. You're doing it in the classroom. I do it in the classroom. I do it in the pulpit. I do it out on these streets, and everywhere I can. That we are engaged in that process that for meaning, and what that means for us: spiritual meaning, cultural meaning, civic meaning. We got to do it, and we're the people to do it. Not somebody else ain't going. Because if we wait for somebody else to do it, they'll have their agenda in mind. They're not going to have mine in mind. And how dare you try to make decisions up over me without me in the room?
Yeah. And I love, especially the part of what you said. I do it wherever I can. And that's what I do. I do it wherever I can, because, again, I've been given just an incredible opportunity that was not the product of just, me putting my nose to the grind, which was a part of it, but I stand on the shoulders, not only the people who fought the battles to open up the doors that I eventually walked through, but even more close to me, the people who spent time talking to me as a child, about the needs of the community in Detroit that I grew up in, like Mr. Bowles and Mr. Grace and Miss Woodbury and my mother and my father and teachers and others who did so many little things that did the course correction, right? That kept me going in the right direction. And it put me in a place where I can sit here and have this kind of a conversation with you. A couple of weeks ago, I spoke at a prison, and talked to about 50 inmates about citizenship and voting and democracy. And it was a very engaged conversation. And I remember everyone, that I've had conversations with about that, they just thought it was so incredible that, that I did that. And it was like making the time to do that. Not only was it meaningful to me, but I knew as that conversation ended and the brothers, got up and shook my hand and, talked to me, I realized that I did something really important for them. And that's what we have been given the opportunity to do. And so, standing on the sidelines is just not an option in my mind. But we shouldn't think of trying to do this alone. We have to do this and to work with others, to try to build the kind of, you know, power we need to build in order to really change or do something that's really transformative. And I think we still can do that, right? But I don't think it's going to be easy. And but we need to commit ourselves to that work. And so, again, as I said before, you know, people are going to make those decisions for us if we don't try to make those decisions for ourselves.
Absolutely. We stand on those shoulders, brother, of Ella Baker. We stand on those shoulders of a Fannie Lou Hamer, Mrs. Rosa Parks, Coretta Scott King, of course, Martin King, and the list goes on, and Malcolm and Betty Shabazz.
Ida B. Wells Barnett.
Ida B. Wells, Lord have mercy. We could go down, I mean, Harriet Tubman, Sojourner Truth, Frederick Douglass. I mean, the list goes on and on of folk who were simple people, from meager, sometimes very obscure roots, to make significant significant contributions to who we are today. And Rebecca Primus, I have to call her name, who was born right here in Hartford, who later became an educator and educated in here the very earliest of African Americans who got their learning and got their schooling, got their lesson, as my grandmother would have called it, and then later went down to a county in Maryland and set up shop, and ultimately created a school and got support from the very people here who built a school that they renamed after her, called the Primus Institute. That school was built in the county where Frederick Douglass was born. That kind of connection. So then that we, again, it's for me is Thurman's idea of where are you rooted, because once you know where you're rooted, your foundation is, then when you start to look inside yourself, the answers start to emerge. That I can't. My spiritual mama would say it this way: what are the ways? Who are the people? What are the things that have so impacted you that you can't walk away from? Right. There's some things I can't walk away from. I'm tired and frustrated and sick of them all. I want them all to go somewhere and sit down somewhere and leave me alone. Right. I mean, that's a feeling. That's a feeling.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. And that's a real one. And yet, I sit down for a few seconds and then I get hot all over again because they're doing something crazy and I got to say something. And I have some resource and some contributions to make with those resources. Brother, we got to go. We done talked up and I can't believe it's an hour and something past this time. I could talk with you for several other hours and not get tired. You are a remarkable person and a partner indeed with us in this work. We do it together, brother. And folks, tomorrow in Connecticut is voting day. You do what you need to do. And participate in what it is that we're doing here, and get up and go do that, and then let's change the world, man. Let's change what needs to get fixed. We can fix it.
Exactly. I can't add anything else. Thank you for the opportunity to share and engage in conversation with you, and we've got to figure out how to do this more often, man. I enjoy talking to you.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure and a joy. Folks, we got to go. But we'll be back at this again. And I promise you, Dr. Sekou is going to be joining us again and again and again. I'm going to call him and worry. I'm going to worry him so often. To do just what we're doing, to have relevant conversations about what means something to some of us, and prayerfully with the divine's help, we'll make our own contributions just like those who have come before us. We'll make our own contributions for ours today and for our future, our progeny. All right. We'll see y'all. God bless. Peace. We out of here for the night.